All right, Dr. Licata, welcome to Alive and Well. So good to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great.
This is great. Okay, so I'm believing that this episode, you guys who are listening, it's going to be so helpful. And I want to jump right in. I am so curious about the work that you are doing. We just talked about it briefly a little bit before we hit record. But for the people listening, can you kind of give us like an intro to the work? And then I kind of want to start talking about anxiety and ADHD and all these other things that we're going to get into. But for the person
Yeah.
listening who has no idea about the work that you do, what are kind of the big picture things they kind of need to understand that'll set them up for the conversation we're about to have?
Yeah, sure. We basically, so I'm the director of Vital Brain Health. We're in Los Angeles, but we have clients all over the country. We basically provide two things. What we call third generation brain mapping. We can, you know, image the brain in 3D, look at the different rooms of the brain, see how they're firing. That tells us not so much who you are, but what you're
Mm.
working with. And it's all evidence-based, which we love. And then the second thing is also what we call third generation neurofeedback. We do 20 different types of neurofeedback. People train again all over the country, and you can literally improve different rooms of your brain. And we primarily help children with anxiety and autism slash neurodivergence and women with anxiety. And so I think that this is probably going to be a good conversation today.
Yeah, I know it will be. I know
Yeah.
so much of our audience experiences anxiety. It's a lot of why they listen to have tools that they
Mhm.
find to be helpful for them.
Yeah.
And I also know that a lot of us watch our kids walk through seasons of anxiety or periods of anxiety or experiences that bring forth a lot of anxiety. And whether it is anxiety or neurodivergence or ADHD or what have you, as a parent, it's really hard to watch our kids go through
Yeah.
some of this stuff, right? And I think the more that we can equip ourselves and just have an understanding of what's actually happening in their brain, that empowers us to be able to support them better. So I
Yeah.
would kind of love to start with maybe anxiety, and maybe we could touch on ADHD a little bit too. But as far
Yeah.
as the work that you do, what do we understand about what's going on in our children's brain or even in our own as it relates to these experiences or diagnoses, however you call them,
Yeah. Right.
and what do we need to know about them just to start?
Yeah. I think ultimately, hopefully, maybe 5 years from now, we'll realize that these what are called DSM-5 codes, these diagnostic codes, are not really helpful. They're maybe too broad, they're too blunt, and so what we understand from a neuroscience perspective is that there are like smaller components in the brain or the body, right, the nervous system, that can kind of mix and match. And sometimes they can spill over and look like what we would call anxiety or generalized anxiety. Sometimes they would mix and match and actually look like ADHD. And then sometimes they mix and match and look like both, right? But like right now, like the DSM-5s, the diagnostic criteria, they're just not, they're not able to kind of define down what's the underlying mechanism. So what does that mean? Well, if a parent, comes to us and says, like, my child has a lot of anxiety and I have a lot of anxiety. Well, in my mind, I think, well, gosh, like those can be two very different things. So let's break that down. If I say if the brain was like a 19 room mansion,
Okay.
right, with many rooms and then hallways that connect them. I'm going to oversimplify this grossly, but just so that we can kind of talk about it. There is like quote unquote a room that has to do with something that we would call anxiety, which is that kind of constant edge that we always feel, right?
Yeah.
Like our nervous system is kind of always a little bit overactivated, right? And also in neuroscience, we call that high arousal. And I joke, I say it's not the fun kind of arousal. It's literally, is my nervous system just kind of on,
Stop. Yeah.
Right, I know, and that's actually an inherited trait. Like we actually got
Oh,
that from mom, dad, or both,
okay.
and we can call that anxiety. In fact, we can sometimes we find that that goes down when we actually drink alcohol, which
Yeah.
has now a little bit of a tendency for us to become addicted to alcohol if we have that inherited trait. But that kind of high level of arousal is what a lot of people will call anxiety. So that's one, right?
Okay.
Let's just say two others because there's more.
Yeah.
There's another that has to do with an area in the front called the anterior cingulate, and it has to do with that kind of rumination, that kind of constant overthinking, right?
Hmm.
When my child is worrying, nonstop about this test that they have to take, or the audition that they're going to do for the like, and like they won't let it go, and you try to give them positive pep talks and blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
but it's the rumination. Like that's actually another part of the brain. It's another room, right?
Okay.
You can
Yeah.
have one, the body. You can have two, the overthinking or the rumination, and or you can have both,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And then there's a third, and of course there's more than three, but we'll step with this. There's a third that's going to be more fear related, and that's actually
Okay.
going to be associated with some of the right amygdala. I don't know if most parents know, but we actually have two amygdalas, not just one. We always talk about it as the amygdala, but we have two. And it's the right amygdala that actually has more to do with that fear kind of response. And that's where we're visually hypervigilant. We're always kind of looking around. We never feel safe. Like there's like fear. It's
Yeah.
actual, like we are afraid, right? And
Yeah.
so again, you can have one, two, or all three, right? And but it's going to be very unique. But we may call any combination anxiety, right?
Yes.
And so that's huge. Right?
Wow. Okay, this is so fascinating. So the first thing that kind of caught my attention was the when you were talking about the first example that you talked about the hyperarousal in our body and kind of
Yes.
walking, always kind of feeling like our heart's racing or our muscles are tense or that kind of level of activation as it relates to anxiety being an inherited trait.
Hmm.
Is that I guess, is that always true? And then as it relates to the different rooms or the different types of anxiety we can experience, are most of them either inherited or, I guess, situational or experiential, or are there some that are both? Like, and what do we do
Yeah,
about the
right.
inherited
What do you
ones?
do about them? Right. Yeah, of course. So yeah, and again, they're mixed, right? So again, to differentiate a little bit, what we call high arousal isn't necessarily a fight or flight reaction.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of key, right? Is that like it's actually its own little thing. We have to kind of like tease that part a little bit, right? Because we tend to think, right, fight or flight, or the vagal system and blah blah. But like, oh man, it gets even more nuanced as we dive in, right? Um, so it's more of like what we would call a GABA response and blah blah blah. Okay, but it just means that the nerves in general tend to fire more, right?
Mm,
And so that is inherited. So that is something that, again, we inherit from mom, dad, or both. And in fact, it's actually, there's an upside to it, which is it literally is also our central speed of processing. So not only are we always kind of activated, we're actually taking in more of the world than other people. Like this is
is
literally like
that more common in people with, and I don't know, again, like what kind of label you would slap on this, but people who describe themselves as higher sensitivity? Is that
that's
similar?
going to be yet another group of rooms that also can jump into that, right? This
Wow.
is where the nuance comes in, right? So it
Okay.
gets, it gets, so yes, but they can be hypersensitive. But also, this is probably the majority of your listeners, right? Anybody who's Most people who are
Yeah.
high achieving are going to have fast processing, meaning we're biologically processing faster. This is called the thalamic speed. We measure it in the back of the brain using EEG. It's one of the things that we do in our analysis. And so, in fact, as as we age, it slows down. If it slows down too much, it's actually one of the biomarkers for like dementia, right? And then there's kind of like, a quote unquote normal range of most people. And then
Mhm.
some of us, right, we tend to rev even faster.
Wow.
And that faster processing is literally like how many frames per second we're taking in the world, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of high achievers are taking in more than others,
Yep.
but also it comes with something. it
Yeah.
comes with a high body arousal that kind of is always a little bit on edge,
Yeah.
right? And so we can call that anxiety. And in fact, the second you give that person alcohol or some other depressant, it slows down that what we call thalamic speed. And we
Mm,
finally feel kind of like quote unquote normal again. But then, of course, what happens once the alcohol's out of our system? We go back up, maybe even more, and now we need more. Right? So there's actually been some research that has shown that like there's a little bit more propensity for alcoholism and
addiction.
other types of addictions because of
Yeah.
that too, right? So okay, but that is so it's not fight or flight. That one is inherited. We can also inherit the overthinking, the rumination,
Okay.
right? But it also a lot of research in trauma and stress has shown that um, that area can get what we call disinhibited. It can get less connected to its surrounding rooms. And it seems like the surrounding rooms have a collective job to keep that room in check.
Wow.
So as when we have something like, and so this we can see this when we're in periods of high stress, we can start sometimes overthink more, right? So we may
Yes.
have over inherited it. We may have inherited it maybe on a setting of 0 to 10. Like most people, let's just say is a 2. We're like a 6, right? But then all of a sudden, there's like some big thing, right? Where there's some thing at the office, or our child got diagnosed with something, and now all of a sudden we have a new set point of like an 8,
Yeah.
right?
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, so it can be both, right? Inherited and situational.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say someone comes to your office with their child and they're presenting or explaining that their child is experiencing high anxiety, and then you're able to do the brain mapping, and the idea is that you see which parts or which rooms of the mansion are lighting up, and that then informs where you go from there. Is that the idea?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so once they do the it's basically an EEG. So they wear a swimmer's cap with 19 different sensors. Sometimes more complex cases will do 32 sensors, but we'll say 19, right?
Okay.
Um, and then they go home, and then we'll sit down and look at their brain in 3D. And based on hundreds of neuroscience papers, we know when this room does this too fast or too slow, when it fires too much or too little, it's been associated with X, right? And
Wow.
so we'll talk about those things for that individual, and we'll say, if you're, what's your goal? And they say, I would like my child to feel less anxious, as a norm.
Hmm.
Okay, well, let's see what kind of rooms are related to this child's anxiety, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3 or more, right? And so we'll highlight those rooms and we'll talk about what they are. And that's really helpful because then the parent can kind of understand, okay, well, that makes sense as to why they're doing this. It makes sense why they're anxious when there's no reason, quote
Yeah.
unquote,
Right.
there's no reason for them to be anxious. Well, if they have that fast processing and that high arousal, they don't need a reason.
It's
That's like
always
a
on.
Ferrari stop. Yeah, it's like a Ferrari stopped at a stoplight, redlining.
Yeah.
It's just like that's just what it does. It idles at that high intensity, right? So, so for parents, it's incredibly insightful for them because they really do have understanding about what their child is going through. And then they'll also even understand, and we get to go into this with them as to like how this influences other things, right? Because
Mhm.
there is going to be what we call an order of operation,
Okay.
socks and shoes. And so we can also see that if this person has really high arousal, they tend to ruminate a lot and they're fearful. Um, they will 10 times out of 10 also be diagnosed with ADHD. Why? Because they can't focus,
Yeah.
right? They,
Yeah.
like they're not going to be able to focus because this is going to take all of those prefrontal and frontal rooms of the brain offline, right?
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
And you guys we're talking about it in a parenting context with kids, but you do the same thing with adults also, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. About half of our clients are adults. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
Let's kind of talk about the socks and shoes thing because I think
Oh
sometimes
yeah,
that
let's
can
do
be
it.
incredibly frustrating as a
Yeah.
wife, as a parent, as a coworker, just like with people in general and the order of operations and the way in which our brain
Mhm.
has to be able to function in order for us to do things in sequence. It's a huge part of operating in society, right? So as our kids are
Yes.
little, talk to me a little bit about how you guys kind of approach that and how it relates to our brain.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, I have 3 kids, right? And so as a parent, it's like, oh my gosh, like there's 1,000 things we want for our children.
Yeah.
And also, depending on what's the most urgent in the moment, is the thing that we want to get solved right away, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, whether they're getting bullied in class, or whether they have some sickness, or maybe there's some developmental thing that happened, and so, like, as parents, we're trying to figure out 1,000 things, and we're trying to figure them out all at once, right? And so, what at Vital, one of the things that I think we do really well is we understand complexity.
Mm.
And what that means is that, okay, well, my child has all of these things. Okay, well, then what do you do? What do you
Yeah.
do first? What do you do second? What are the major things that you need to do, and what are the minor things, right? And so, so order of operations is going to be, we understand. So let's go back to order of operations. I'm going to simplify this, but say, in the way the brain works, it's going to work in an order of operations of three steps, right?
Okay.
It first needs to be regulated. And then it needs to be regulated in order to direct its attention. And then, if it's regulated and can direct its attention, then you can work on things that we would call, executive function, more complex learning like mathematics, or, reading composition, or things like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, when a parent says, I often always start the conversation with a parent. I say, okay, if we could only help improve one thing in the next 4 months, what would it be? Of course, they tell me 10, right? And so, they're like, okay, well, I want them to have less outbursts. I want them to not go from like 0 to 100. I want
Yeah.
them to also have, feel more self-confident. I want them to feel better about themselves, but I also want them to get better grades, and I want them to do better math, right? Like, it's like, okay, right, of
Make them
course, yes,
perfect.
yes, make them perfect. I get it. I totally understand. So
Yeah.
then let's understand, where is this child's lowest rung on that
Okay.
three stages, right? Because, um, that concept, I call it the $1 million concept.
Yeah.
Because if you understand the order of operations, then you put the resources on the lowest rung first.
Yeah. Yeah. The
And as you
foundation, right? It's like we're not going
yeah,
to
right,
build it
yeah, and it
on that.
sounds, yeah, I mean, it sounds very kind of like basic, but you'd be surprised, right? If we don't understand that, and we don't understand what is the foundation, and we don't understand that, like, for instance, if my child, again, we'll just use the anxiety thing. If my child is anxious, we're not going to, like, the Ritalin is not going to help that child's quote unquote ADHD,
Yeah.
right? The tutor is not going to help that child focus or, do better in math, right? Like,
For skipping. Yeah.
so wait on those things, right? And let's just work on the first. And then a lot of times those other things kind of fix themselves. And then you can save your money. But then if they haven't, now when you go and put the money into those things, now the child's going to respond,
You're ready. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Can
So
we go
really
through
powerful.
each of those in a little bit
Sure.
more detail? Because I think, especially starting with regulation, like we talk about it so much, but I think it's also a term that gets thrown around a lot. And I think there's a lot
I
of
know.
misunderstanding about what it means to be regulated. Like I'm sure there's parents listening now. They're like, okay, so when my kid's calm all the time, that's when I can like move on to step two. And that's not
Yeah.
necessarily what it means, right? So tell us, like, when we're
Right.
talking about starting from a place of regulation, what does that actually mean in the work that you do?
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you the nerd answer, and then,
Yeah, I love it.
more
Give it to
practical,
me.
right? So,
Yeah.
like, the nerd answer, like, it's really the ability for the brain and nervous system to, what we say, regulate fluctuations in the frequencies of the brain, right?
Okay.
And then coordinate all the different activities of all the networks of the brain, right? So, like, that's the nerd answer. And so it's like, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so now what? Well, okay, but what does it mean practically? I'm going to say that, it is a baseline ability for a child to have agency
Mm-hmm.
over their feelings, their their thoughts, and their perceptions,
How much of
right?
that has to do with safety?
I think it's necessary but not sufficient,
Interesting. Okay.
right? So yes, you absolutely have to have safety, right? Um, And yet, as we know, you can still be very dysregulated even though you're in a safe space. And
Physically.
so,
Yeah.
physically, and even, yeah. And so I'll use an example. So I mean, again, if we don't feel safe and we've had trauma, and that's a whole
Yeah.
another field, like we work
Yeah.
with, we do a lot of different forms of neurofeedback for trauma as well.
Okay.
Um, and that we can geek out on that on another episode. But like, yes, like there are lots of things that have to be in place in order for us to quote unquote feel safe, for
Hmm.
sure. Um, but like I mentioned, there are things that don't involve, like let's just say the amygdala that is looking at safety and trying to, and part of what we call the salience network that has to do with safety that can still dysregulate us, right? So that high arousal, we
Yeah.
can feel safe, but still just not right, right?
Yeah.
Um, the Also, there are things, there are little sparks that can happen in the brain. We call this isolated epileptiform discharges. So they're not seizures, but they're like little neurons that just tend to like, zap every once in a while. And
Yeah.
if they happen to occur over certain areas, like we get very dysregulated, right?
Yeah.
And the neurologists are going to look at the data and say, that's not, that's, it's within normal limits. But what we see is that there's been a lot of published research, especially out of Texas, that has shown that no, in fact, that actually has been highly associated with disrupting their attention,
Oh, that's
creating
incredible.
anxiety, creating panic attacks, creating all kinds of things that are just like literally physical, right?
Yeah.
So, so again, safety is necessary, but not sufficient
Wow.
to be regulated,
That makes so much
right?
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so for this first rung, this foundational piece of regulation, what are, and I don't even know if this is like a good question, but what are some
Yeah.
of the things that parents listening who are like, okay, if I'm going to start somewhere, what are some things that you guys teach or that their children could start doing to like grow in the kind of regulation that you're talking about? That's the first step.
Yeah, and so then that's where I think we'll introduce the state change tools and the
Okay.
trait change tools,
Let's
right?
do it.
Another key concept, really huge. So if we have order of operations, right, we need to know regulation and then attention, and then there's more higher order functions like executive function and learning, so on. Um, with state change tools versus trait change tools, this is huge. Um, uh, I love your show. I love what you offer, and so much of what you offer are these tools, right? For both parents and children to begin to regulate themselves, right? The
Yeah.
physiologic sigh, right? The therapeutic tremors and the shaking, like those are powerful. They're absolutely powerful. They're necessary parts of our repertoire, right? And in neuroscience, those are considered what we call state change tools, right? They help us in the moment,
Yeah.
right? And we
Yeah.
need it. Like we absolutely need it. And we also know that if we do them enough, there will be a cumulative effect over time that
Yeah.
will eventually start to change our trait. And by trait, what I mean is like if I'm anxious at an 8 out of 10, can I get down to like a 6 out of 10 as my baseline? Right? That's a
Hmm.
trait, right? A state is like what is my daily up and down, but where do I go back to is my trait again.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Right?
Yep.
So those are state change tools. And again, I don't think I have, I mean, there's so many great things, right? I mean, you've mentioned, I think your last episode was phenomenal on providing some of these state change tools. And Andrew Huberman and so many others have, there's so many out there. Um, a few others are going to be, the better the parent is able to self-regulate, the better
Mm.
the child will regulate,
Yeah.
right? And this isn't meant to be now one more thing we feel guilty about of like, of course, I'm not even that. I'm not even able to regulate myself because of that. But it gives us permission to maybe do those things for ourselves and not feel guilty
Yes.
because of our child's mirror neuron system,
Yeah.
that when mom or dad or any primary caregiver is in a regulated state, if that child's mirror neuron system is active, and they're not always, we could see it on the brain map. But if
Ah,
they are active,
okay.
we can see that they will begin to self-regulate just by being around you,
Yeah. Yep. It starts with
right?
us. Oh, like
It
for so many
starts
reasons,
with
like when the
us.
things I wanted with my kids, especially when they were little, like had to, like that was my mantra. I'm like, it starts with me. It starts with me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So those are great. There are fewer trait change tools.
Okay.
Right, things that change your set point from the 8 to a 6 or the 8
Mhm.
to a 5 or 4, right? um, Neurofeedback, right, is a trait change tool, which is why I do it, right, which is why we spend so much time and energy on it, and why it's, disproportionately maybe a bigger investment. It's a more commitment, but if you understand what it's giving you,
Yeah.
then you understand that, like, oh, if my baseline could now go from an 8 to a 5
Yeah.
in a 4-month period,
Wow.
and then I keep using these other state change tools from there,
Yeah.
look at how the combination of the two now makes the breakthrough,
Yeah.
right?
Wow. Yep. Yeah. It's almost like this, like a lot of the state change stuff that I teach, when I teach it, it's like a band-aid. Like sometimes we need band-aids
Oh,
and
of
band-aids
course,
are
it's not
important.
either or.
And then at the
Yeah.
end of the day, right, it's like we have to take a look at, why do I need so many band-aids? Or I can't keep just grabbing band-aids. What's going on under the surface? So when you're
Yeah.
talking about the traits or the trait changers, and you're talking about, if I'm at an 8, or then I can get down to a 6 in 4 months. If we're talking about anxiety, maybe, or level of anxiety, what are some of the other traits that we can change, or traits that people change?
Yeah, I mean, a lot, which is phenomenal. Again, if it's children, the big outbursts, that's always related to a lot of what's called the prefrontal areas of the brain behind the forehead.
Okay.
Those areas can't kind of keep back some of those bigger emotions. And so those are powerfully helped with quality, targeted, customized neurofeedback with a brain map. So the outbursts, the 15-minute long tantrums at the grocery store,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it's like, oh, that mom is so irresponsible. If I was
Mhm.
that child's parent, I would do. No, you don't realize that child's
Mhm.
part of the brain is offline right now.
Yep.
It's offline, you're right.
Yeah.
The oppositional tendencies, the
Okay.
tendencies to get extremely, the no, fixed on, the rigidity. I'm only going to eat this one thing. Or we have a lot of kids that train with us that have school refusal. I'm
Okay.
not going to school. I'm not going to do that thing. Those are all traits that are very changeable, right?
Okay. How about in
Yeah.
adults? What do you tend to
In
see? I'm
adults,
curious.
yeah. Focus, so attention. So we talked about anxiety, it still applies to adults. Attention is massive. In fact, that's part of my story. I was at a point where, I was very busy. We've had, so many clients, and, married. I was on 2 boards, and I realized, like, I don't feel like I'm doing any one of these areas very well, and I don't think I could work any harder. Like, I just can't do it. Like, there's not more that I can do, right?
Wow.
And I realized that, that's where I kind of set off on my own path to improve my own brain. And so I started working with another colleague, and got my brain map, and saw that I had certain areas of my front part of my brain that were, had changed based on some old concussions that I had. And
Whoa.
so, and these were, like, years ago in high school, even, right? I snowboarded and skateboarded and played football and basketball. And so, like, there were lots of things that, and even though I didn't, like, pass out, I didn't throw up on any of these occurrences, I still had remnants of old injury, right? And
Wow.
so, and because of it, though, what I realized is that I didn't know it was related. My attention was horrible. So now I have, multiple degrees. I'm relatively smart enough to have compensated in wild ways, but I couldn't sit down to do, like, let's say, taxes to save my life, right? And
That's wild.
so my ADHD was it was like an 8 out of 10 as far as trait goes.
Okay.
And I've now trained multiple rounds and done multiple things because I get to, have access to everything.
Yeah.
But after the first round, like, I actually measured it using what's called a continuous attention test, and I basically improved over 50%,
Whoa.
right?
Whoa. After
And
the
so, and
first
I could feel it, yeah, in the first round. And we
round.
see that also with our clients, right? And so, and I could feel it, right? Like, I could just sit down and just do the work.
Yeah, you had like
Like,
unlocked something new, a new
it
superpower.
was like it was like it was like if I had, it's like when we have, like, dogs that, like, are not well trained, and we take them on a walk, and they're big and they're just pulling all the time. And then all
Yes.
of a sudden, you, like, as time goes on, the dog just starts walking by your side. Like that's
Wow.
how it felt in my brain, right? I always felt like I had to wrangle my brain and I had to like, find ways to pull it together. And then like it just would just do what I wanted it to do, right? Like it's kind of wild, right?
Wow, you had
And
trained your
so
brain.
you could, yeah, right. And so I knew that, okay, this is even my own life. I'm able to see the changes, right? Which is great.
Wow.
So
Thanks for
yeah, so
sharing
as an
that. I'm
adult,
sure
that's
there's,
huge.
yeah, so many people listening that can relate to that feeling,
Mhm.
and struggling with attention. And then we're so quick to like blame it on whatever, so many different things, and we don't realize what's available to us,
Yeah,
for that
yeah,
trait, whatever it is. Cool.
right.
You
Yeah.
mentioned 4 months. Is that like what a typical training session or how you
Mhm.
guys call it is? And is that
Yeah.
because of how our brain functions? Or tell me a little bit more about the time frame.
Yeah, we found that there's like a minimum effective dose to create a lasting change,
Okay.
right? And that tends to be about 4 months of training. Um, and for us, we want that if somebody, trains with us, like, for 4 months, we want that to be lasting. And we also won't accept a client unless we really believe we can get a minimum of 30 to 50% improvement in that thing that we're working on, right? So like that's what allows us to have. So the 4 months is because why? Well, it's not magic. Like we know, and I'm sure you know, and your listeners know about neuroplasticity, right? We use that term a lot. Well, what's the lay definition? Well, neurons that fire together wire together, right? And so when we could put a little sensor that listens to the neurons right over that one room, and
Hmm.
we know that that one room, let's just say, is firing too fast, it's not able to slow down and get into a different, let's say, tune or frequency. Um, we know that if we have that person put the sensor there, watch a show through some sophisticated software, and we know that person's brain is wired to see that show clearly,
Hmm.
right? They want to see the visual clearly. And then we hack the show and we say, when that person's brain is doing that, let's say that slower speed, make the show be clear.
Hmm.
And when that brain goes in that room, goes back to the faster speed, make the show go into black and white and make it look like there's rain on the screen, right? And so what happens is in one sitting, that person is literally training those neurons to fire together, to fire at a different gear, let's just say, right?
Whoa.
And they're doing that about 900 to 1,000 times in that, 15 to 30-minute period, right?
Okay.
And if they do that 2 or 3 times a week over about a 4-month period, those same neurons keep firing together, firing together, firing together, firing together. And when that person sleeps, basically in REM sleep mostly, is when their neurons are wiring together to be able to now do that better,
Wow.
right? And so, and as time goes on, we make it harder so that they have to do more of what we're asking before we make the screen clear, right? So like it's the ability to actually change the quote unquote hardware, right? It's the ability to really change the brain the way we would change our body, like if we had to like strengthen a shoulder or something, you know.
Yeah, and it's not medication, and it's not, it's all within.
It's all within. Absolutely. Yeah. Which is really powerful. And then that's the thing is once you've done it, you have access to it,
Yep.
you reinforce it by just doing that thing more,
More.
right? So
Yeah.
every time I sit down and actually just do the taxes or just do the work, I'm reinforcing those neurons to wire together even more, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes, very powerful and long lasting because then it's you. Like we're not changing you. You just have more access to your own potential.
Oh my goodness, this is so
Yeah.
incredible. Okay, anything before like we tell the people how they can have access to this and learn more. Um, Anything that I've missed that you really want to share? I know that you have like things about the different generations of neurofeedback. Do we kind of touch on that, or do you want to?
Yeah. Without going too into it, I think that any parent who has a child that has significant, let's just say, emotional dysregulation or anxiety or other needs, I think neurofeedback is a massive tool for them in their repertoire, right? I think it's so valuable. It doesn't have to be with us, right? It just should be with you. Just know that's going to be an important tool. But when a parent goes and then searches on the web, like there's all kinds of things about neurofeedback, and some are great, some are not, right? And
Yeah.
so, kind of going back to the nuances of things, I'm going to oversimplify and say that there are now three generations of neurofeedback, right?
Okay.
And so when we go and just search things, sometimes it's like, oh, this helped, this didn't help. It hasn't been shown to be good for this, or it's good with that, or oh my gosh, my child had this experience and they had this, horrible response. Well, okay, there are. I'm going to say neurofeedback 1.0 is neurofeedback where they don't do a map
Okay.
and they're just kind of going based off of a couple of sensors and what's happening in the moment, right? And so I would just say that can have some tools and have some benefit, especially in certain contexts. It's just not what we do.
Okay.
And because of it, though, sometimes there can be a little bit more unwanted responses or reactions because you don't have a
Mhm.
full picture of what the whole brain is doing, right?
Okay.
2.0 is going to be what they do the sensors, the 19 channels, and they compare that person's brain to, let's just say, a group of normal people, quote unquote, right? A normative database, and that's where you'll get like these colored circles. And they'll say, green is great, and reds are too much, and blues are not enough. And that's kind of, it gives you some insight, but it also kind of like overly simplifies a thousand things. And go figure, we're not like everybody else, and there's a lot more nuance that kind of we should know about, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do is the 3.0, where we're doing multiple layered of analysis. We're using machine learning to look at different regions of the brain. We're looking at those things that were inherited and not. Like we look at a lot of information to then customize this for the individual. And then we do over 20 different types of neurofeedback, depending
Wow.
on what that individual needs in
Okay.
that room. Right. So,
Whoa.
that's what allows us to basically be able to say, great, we're going to expect 30 to 50% improvement,
Yeah.
and be able to like drastically, significantly eliminate any possible quote unquote side effects or adverse reactions because we know exactly what that person needs. Right?
Wow. Yeah, it's
So,
super individualized and specific. You guys just have
yeah,
gathered so much. Wow. Okay.
yeah.
Um, I'm pretty sure every parent listening is like, I can see how either myself or my child would greatly benefit. I mean, everyone, right, from something like this.
Yeah.
For people who are thinking that and are curious about next steps, like where should they go to learn more? How can they connect with you and your team?
Yeah, I think, vitalbrainhealth.com is the best place to go, probably. And if, we're in Los Angeles, we have parents training all throughout the country. I say this, if it's not just about us. If they want to go on, there's there's uh, there's I'll also I'll share on the show notes. There's certain organizations that they can go to and see who's been accredited and so on,
Okay.
and who's in their local area, so that it's not really just all about us, right? So I want to make sure that parents have other options.
Mhm.
Um, but if a parent does want to, let's say, train with us, they can reach out. We have a lot of times parents will either fly in to see us to do the map, and then they fly home and they do all the rest of the training there, or we help them find a place to do the initial EEG in their region. And so they can
Okay.
contact our team. We'll help you. And then we're also, because with you and your listeners, we'll also share a code that for five parents who want to fly into Los Angeles and do the brain map for their child, and they think that this is something they want to do, we'll actually cover their tickets.
Mhm.
For the child's ticket to fly in and come see us, because we want to eliminate some of that friction, because we have so many people that benefit from it locally, but we have people in Salt Lake City or in, Buffalo or in Boston that are just saying, my gosh, if I could just, if we just get started, but it's just too much to figure out to get there.
Yeah.
Well, let's see if we can remove that. And I think that'd be a great gift we can share.
Yeah, for sure. So you
Mhm.
guys, there's going to be a code in the show notes. And then for those of you who are interested, the first five that use that code, they'll actually pay for your child's ticket to come see them in LA and do this brain mapping, which is so generous. And I think for those of you who feel like you're maybe at the end of your rope, right? Maybe you've tried everything. Maybe you are really hesitant to start your child on medication, and believe that you want to kind of dot every I and cross every T before you feel like you have to do so. I think this is such a powerful next step. So I
Yeah.
encourage you to take advantage of it. But man, thanks so much for the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
This is huge. Like, this is not just about fixing something that's annoying about ourselves or our children, right? This is like generational work. This is like, how can we expand our capacity for the call that we have on our life, right? To show up in the big ways that we're meant to. So, just so grateful for you, the work that you're doing, your team, and thanks for
Yes.
being here and sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I so appreciate you having me. This is
My
great.
pleasure.